My name is Barbara Quinn, and today I have the pleasure of interviewing Magistrate Katherine Hutchinson. Today is July 13th, 2004, and I am conducting this interview as a part of the Connecticut Bar Foundation James W. Cooper's Fellows Oral History of Connecticut Women in the Legal Profession project, and the project is sponsored by the Connecticut Bar Foundation. Now, Katherine, would you tell us your full name?
It's Katherine Yeomans Hutchinson.
And Yeomans, as I understand it, is your birth name?
Yes, it is. My father was John Yeomans, and my mother was Margaret Yeomans, and so I use my maiden name as a middle name.
Would you mind telling us your date of birth?
September 1st, 1936.
And where were you born?
Well, I was born in Hartford, although I grew up and spent my entire life in Andover.
And you still live in Andover?
I still live in Andover.
Tell us a little bit about your parents and what they did.
Well, my mother was what in the 50s would have been called a traditional housewife. My dad was an attorney. At the point when I was born, he was in what was his dad's firm, Spellisy and Yeomans, in Hartford. And in the early 40s, he was named the clerk of the courts for Talon County and was the clerk of the courts in Talon County until the mid-70s when he retired.
And did he practice law at all?
Yes, he practiced law from the time he graduated from Harvard in the late 20s until the early 40s when he was named the clerk for Talon County. And
as you were growing up, did you have any siblings?
Yes, I have two older brothers.
And what did they do?
Well, one was a CPA and the other a school teacher. My dad discouraged them from becoming attorneys, but he always told people with a little smile that he didn't think he had to worry about me.
Little did he know.
Little did he know.
And when would you say you developed an interest in the law?
Oh, very early. As a little girl, I frequently went with my dad to his office in Rockville and would spend a good part of the day in court with him watching what was going on. So
Did you find that interesting?
Oh, fascinating, yes. Yeah. Fascinating.
How old would you have been when you first started to do that?
Oh, 6, 7, 8 in there. I used to go with him, summer vacations, spend the day. And that continued right through until I went off to college.
So you had some exposure to the law and its workings in the court system?
Yes, yes. Yeah. Both in the courtroom and in the clerk's office to see what went on in the background.
And as you were a child, did you have any particular things you wanted to do when you grew up?
Well, yes, I had two major things. One was to be a horse owner and the other was to be an attorney. And I very early found out you had to be the attorney before you could afford to be a horse owner.
And since that time, are you indeed the owner of some horses?
Yes. I currently have 9.
You have 9 horses?
At this point, yes.
And do you show them or race them?
No, we race them. I race them.
What kinds of horses are they?
They're thoroughbreds. So they are what are called flat racers, with the jockeys as opposed to the sulkies.
And you ride them sometimes
yes,
for show?
I ride
or
not the race horses, but I do ride, yes.
When did you acquire your first horse, I should say, personally?
Well, we rented ponies from the time I was 4. Had my first horse actually when I was 12. And
have you won any prizes through the years?
Well, I didn't show, so I didn't win any prizes, but racing, we've been on and off moderately successful.
That's great. We talked a little bit about your early interests, and where did you grow up?
I grew up in Andover, which, as I say, I lived all my life. I live half mile now from where I grew up as a child.
You go to high school there?
We went to Windham High School. Back then, there were about 14 towns that fed into Windham High School, which is located in Willimantic. The towns were too small in the area to have their own high school at that point.
Did you take the bus, or how did you get there?
Yes, the school bus picked us up every morning and took us there.
Was that a long ride or not too bad?
And no, it was about a 20-minute ride. The big disadvantage is that because the bus left right after school, we couldn't participate in any of the after-school activities. But
And your mother didn't ferry you around in the ways that people do today?
not the way our mothers do today.
I think it was very different.
Yeah, it
certainly
was much different, yes.
As I recall in
Yeah.
the 50s. Did you work part-time at all during high school?
I worked during the summers, yes.
And what did you do?
Oh, I worked in a 5 and 10 and in a local little snack bar, a little restaurant.
Is there anything particular that you remember about high school that stands out in your mind?
Other than it was quite different than it is today. Discipline was very strict. You were expected to do your very best, and if you didn't, not only did your teachers, but in the administration get involved, but also your parents very much got involved. It was a rather structured situation, which was interesting because it is a public high school.
And do you have any recollection of how they handled that? I mean, how did they enforce the discipline that they maintained?
Well, the first step was you got sent to a detention room, which was just a classroom where you spent time after school. Everything from that to a visit to the principal's office, which is what you did not want to do.
I can't imagine that happened very often to you.
I don't believe it did.
Did you have any particular role models while you were in high school?
My folks, I think I would have to say. While my mother was a traditional 50s housewife, she was also very involved in the town of Andover, serving on various boards and commissions, and just a very active person from that standpoint. And then, of course, my dad, because he was an attorney and he was, as I say, at that point, the clerk. And even in high school, I still used to go over to court with him during the summer and spend the day seeing what was going on, meeting a lot of fascinating people. I got to know a lot of judges.
Did anybody stand out in your mind during those years?
Well,
that you
John Hamilton King, who was then on the
Yes.
Superior Court bench and who later, of course, became Chief Justice, was a frequent visitor in our home, as a matter of fact. And he was a really kind of a role model as well, because he always was willing to discuss the law with me, particularly in law school, in a very positive and instructive manner. So, and of course, even after I got out of law school and had my own home, I think my father and I used to bore people to death because we would get together and discuss law at family social events.
As I like to tell people, the things that we attorneys find interesting make other people's eyes glaze over.
Absolutely.
Now, at some point, you graduated from high school and
Yes.
went on to college.
Yes.
And what college did you choose?
Skidmore College in Saratoga Springs, New York. It was a small women's college back then. And I spent 2 years there, and at that point had become engaged to my future husband. So I looked into transferring to the University of Connecticut because they had a program called the Combined Program, which allowed, if you were accepted by the law school, to attend law school at the end of your 3rd year of college. And then after 2 years of law school, you would be awarded your bachelor's degree, and then, of course, what was then an LLB upon completion of law school. So at the end of 2 years, I transferred to the University of Connecticut to participate in that program.
And so you finished 2 years of college and then 2 years of law school?
2 years of college, a summer session at UConn, another whole year at UConn, and then at the end of the 3rd year, went to law school.
And did you always know you wanted to go to law school? Or is
Oh,
that-
yes.
Yeah.
I never wanted to be anything but a lawyer.
And during the time that you were in college and law school, did your husband and you become married?
Yes, we were married at the end of my 1st year of law school, which would have been the equivalent of graduating from college. But yes, it was at the end of my 1st year of law school.
And during that time, can you think of anyone that was particularly influential in your choices that you were making, other than the people that you've mentioned, your family?
No, that was pretty much it. It was, as I say, my family and probably Justice King, who was most influential during that time.
And given all the things you were doing, did you have any time for extracurricular activities?
In law school?
Yeah.
Actually, no.
Yeah, I was going to say, I don't know where you'd fit it in. So what were the dates you attended the University of Connecticut Law School?
From for the fall of 57 until the spring of 60. I graduated in 1960. Took the bar, back then we took the bar at the end of June, and the results came out, and I was sworn in at the end of August of 1960.
So relatively quickly.
It was relatively quickly.
Compared to what happens
Yes.
today.
And of course, back then, the bar exam was actually 2 days of the essay questions as opposed to the multi-state. There was no multi-state
Right,
exam
that
back then.
didn't come into being, I think, until 1972. What did your future husband, think about you going to law school?
Oh, he was very supportive. He was very supportive all during law school, even though it meant sitting just watching me study at nights and weekends. But, he was very supportive.
And what was he doing at that time?
He was working for a construction company at that time. And then once we moved back to Andover, because we lived in Hartford for a couple of years while I was going to school, he started his own construction company.
Can you tell us if there was anyone who discouraged you from going to
No,
law
not
school?
at all. Which, when I
interesting.
think back, was very interesting because in the 50s, women just didn't go to law school.
No, it was not common.
Yeah. I remember having lunch with one of the few women attorneys that were around back in the 50s, and this was even before I went to law school. I was still in college. And her encouraging me to go forward. And I think that was very reassuring because she told me how it was back then to be a woman in what was a man's world.
And
That was very positive.
what advice did she give you?
Well, the thing that stands out into my mind is that she said, never forget you're a lady, which I thought was very, very helpful because she said, you don't have to be blustery or use inappropriate language or be anything other than yourself, and never forget you're a lady, which I thought was very interesting.
Yeah. Was she in practice
Yes,
then?
she was.
And
She was
who
in
was
practice.
this?
I believe her name was Dorothy Kellerman.
And she
This-
practiced in the Hartford
In the
area?
Hartford area, yeah.
And how many women were in your law school class?
Well, 5 of us started. One woman dropped out within the first week or 10 days. One woman withdrew the middle of the spring semester. One woman, the third woman, did not pass and was not back in the fall. So 2 of us finished. The other woman was Sandra Gerstern, who was married to Aaron Gerstern, who was also a lawyer.
So the two of you were married women?
The 2 of us married women survived.
Can you say that you enjoyed law school during those years?
I enjoyed law school, yes. It was a 7 o'clock in the morning to 11 o'clock at night regimen, but I enjoyed it.
And did you have any particular reaction from the male classmates that you had?
Oh, yes. It was very interesting. Early on, and not everyone, but a good many of them voiced the opinion that what were we doing there? We were taking up a spot that a man could have had. That dissipated when they found out what serious students we really were. The other approach that a couple of them took was, well, you're just here to find a husband, which of course at that point I'd already found, so that became academic as far as I got that straightened out fairly quickly. As I said, we were engaged and were married at the end of my first year. By the end of the first year, by the time we started the second year, as I say, they realized we were serious students, and there was really no problem after that.
Were there any particular activities that you participated in law school, like moot court or?
No, there were very few activities to participate. I believe there might have been a moot court, but that was really it.
And during that time, did you have any women professors?
Just one, Shirley Racy Beisowitz, taught legal bibliography. And it was a pleasure to have her there, one, because she was the only woman on the staff, and secondly, because she was just a couple of years older than I.
Yeah.
And so, and she was a great person. She just
she
really
was a delightful lady.
And I got to know her after law school, and I became involved in the Connecticut Bar Association, and Shirley was very involved too. So.
And I think it's, you know, it was a loss to the profession that she passed away as young
It's
as
a very
she
young
did.
age, yes.
Yeah. And how about your male professors? How did they treat you and the surviving other female member of your class?
For the most part, they were great. I had some really tremendous professors. I had Professor Starr, and he was just such a gentleman, and he treated us just like everybody else. I had Doug Wright for torts, and of course he was a real gentleman.
He's a wonderful man.
People like Tom Gallivan, who came in and taught. So they were, for the most part, a very positive experience.
I had Tom Gallivan at the law school for property. The last year he taught, it was the year before he passed away, and I just remember it being a real delight. I mean, he was so interested in land law.
Yeah,
and
it's interesting you should say that, because I probably learned more from him about a given subject than I did anybody else.
Yeah.
To this day, I'll think of things that he did and said, and that still pertain, because of course the property law hasn't changed that much in the last 40 plus years.
And I think for those of us that practiced in small towns and cities, much of our work was indeed
Yes.
had to do with property transfers of one kind or another, and boundary disputes and quiet title actions and adverse possession claims.
Yes. As a matter of fact, I taught for a number of years at the University of Connecticut an 8 o'clock in the morning class called Legal Aspects of Family Life. And every once in a while I get some of my students who would complain about the exams, particularly the essay part. So I always would tell them about the final exam that Tom Gallivan gave in his property course, which was on an 8.5 by 13 piece of paper, single spaced, one question, and at the bottom he said, discuss. Discuss, yes.
Is there any single event you remember most about law school?
Surviving the first year. As I say, we were married at the end of my first year, and I would call home, because that's where the mail went, to my folks' house about every 4 days to see if the grades were in, because I was really apprehensive about surviving.
Yeah, yeah. Did you
There
have
was no problem, but I
Yeah.
worried anyway. Yeah.
No, I suspect there would not have been a problem, but that's, I think, in the nature of things that you do worry.
Well, the other problem is that if I didn't, then I would have had to have gone back and completed my senior year at the main campus of
Oh,
UConn.
that's right.
So
So
that
it
was
would-
another problem, not only with my dreams of being an attorney would have gone down the drain, but I would have had to go back and spend another year.
And did you have any mentors in law school?
No, it was not set up so that you had mentors or even class advisors or personal advisors that you could go speak to at that time. So
And how many students were there in your class?
there were 60 that started in my class, so 5 out of the 60 were women. And I believe 38 finished, and there were 2 of us, 2 women, as I said earlier.
As you sit here today, what would you say the most important thing you learned in law school was?
How to think.
How to think.
How to think and analyze, yes.
And you think you might have picked up some of that in your family home as you were growing up?
Yes,
or-
actually, I remember having a physics course and having a terrible time with it. And my father sitting me down and saying, okay, what do you know about this question? And what is the question asking? All right, now apply what you know toward what the question is asking, which of course is a way to analyze, as you know, the facts, the issues, and then the law anytime
Yeah.
you're briefing a legal issue.
Would you say there's any one professor that helped you with how to think in a legal framework than
Yes,
anyone else?
I would say Professor Starr.
Professor
Professor
Starr,
Starr, yes.
And was that because of the way he conducted his classes?
Yes,
or-
and the way he thought and the way he presented his cases, presented his lectures, yes.
Now, you mentioned that in the year that you graduated in 1960, you took the bar exam. What do you recall about that?
About taking the bar
Yes.
exam? Being very nervous going into it, but once we got started with the blue books and the number 2 pencils or the pens or whatever we chose to use, just concentrating and getting through it. And it was interesting because one thing I remember in particular is I had not had a course in bankruptcy, and there was a bankruptcy question on there. So all I knew about bankruptcy came from the cram course that we took for about 3 weeks between graduation and the time the bar exam was given. So I wrote down just about what I knew about bankruptcy, which had to do with a preference, and came out and was sure I had just not done well on that at all. And then listening to other students who had bankruptcy trying to discuss what the question was getting at. And I said, gee, all I could see is whether or not there was a preference there. And they said, oh my goodness, you were right. So sometimes ignorance is helpful. But that's the funny thing I remember about the bar
Do you
exam.
know how many lawyers were sworn in with you
No,
that
I
year?
don't. No.
And how about women? Were there any other
Very
women?
few. As a matter of fact, I almost didn't get sworn in because they were not going to let me into the room because it was, quote, for lawyers people getting sworn in only, unquote. But finally, a couple of my classmates came along and said, "No, she's with us." Yeah,
rescued you.
Seriously, they were trying to keep me out of the room.
Now, after you graduated, did you find work as an attorney?
Yes, I had a job when I graduated in actually a one-man firm in Rockville. I had been interviewed before graduation. And he was looking for just someone part-time, which at that point fit in beautifully with my schedule because my daughter was born in October of that year.
So you were pregnant
So,
at that time.
yeah, so that worked out nicely.
And who
So
was that?
His name is Edwin Lavitt, and he had a firm in Rockville. He'd been practicing probably 5, 6, 7 years at that point and just needed some additional help, but not full-time help. So that worked out very well. And then by the time my second child was born, 3 years later, I was working full-time.
And did you tell him that you were pregnant?
Yes. Oh, yes.
And how did that happen?
Well, he offered me the job, so I said, well, I think there's something you ought to know before you, and I'll allow, to withdraw that offer if you want to. And, and I told him I was expecting a baby in October, and he said, yeah.
So he was
And he
very
says, how long are you
matter-of-fact
planning
about
to
it.
take off? And I said, well, back then it was 6 weeks. I said, probably 6 weeks. And it was rather ironic because I took probably 5 weeks and was ready to go back to work the following Monday and then broke my foot in a riding accident, so I was out for another 3 weeks with that. But by the time my second child was born, I was back in 2 weeks.
Was that the only job interview you had,
Yes.
or did you look for others?
No, it was the only one I had. I had been approached. The new circuit court came in effect in January of the following year, January of '61, about being a possibility of a job as a clerk. And but I decided I had worked very hard and I wanted to be in private practice. And Ed Lavitt's practice was a very small general practice, as were most of the law firms, at least east of the river in those days.
And during the first year that you were in practice, when your child was little, very little, what sorts of work did you do?
Well, as I say, we had a general practice. So I did a lot of title searching, going to closings, representing people in the old circuit courts. And, of course, back in those days, women were not major trial lawyers. Other than in family cases, women rarely tried cases. And so Ed Lavitt did any trials that we had other than the family cases.
So you
But
did do some family trials?
Yes, and also I became town attorney for the town of Andover, which was a wonderful experience because I was able to get involved in a lot of the areas of the law that I would not normally have gotten involved in had I not been town attorney. And I was town attorney for some 24 years. I finally resigned later when I took another position, left private practice.
What kinds of things did you become involved with that you might not have otherwise?
As town attorney?
Yes.
Oh, everything from drafting ordinances, giving advice. I practiced a proactive, let's keep the town out of trouble rather than getting them out of trouble after they've gotten themselves into it. And everything from that to doing a condemnation. It was a bridge project that we did and did a condemnation, which, of course, as from that aspect, I never would have gotten into otherwise.
Yes.
So it was very interesting.
And with respect to being a town attorney, did that have you going out to night meetings?
Oh, yes, yes.
And how did that work with your family?
That was no problem, actually, because my husband was a great dad and didn't mind staying with the kids at all.
So he would fill in the gap when you
He'd fill in the
couldn't be
gaps,
there.
yes.
Now, you mentioned your first child. Tell us about your other children.
I had 3 kids altogether, and none of them became a lawyer. So.
Did you advise them not to, or is it
No,
just a natural
no, I
choice?
just kind of let things take their natural course. So.
Was there a time in the office with Attorney Lavett that other lawyers joined you?
Yes,
Or you-
yes.
And how
Fairly
long was
early
that?
on, Arnold Aronson, who then became a Superior Court judge, joined the firm, and at that point, we formed the partnership of Lavett, Aronson, and Hutchinson. Briefly, we merged with a large firm from Hartford called Ribicoff and Kotkin, and when we unmerged, Arnold stayed with them, and we acquired John Kaplan, who had been at Ribicoff and Kotkin. And then the firm became Lavett, Hutchinson, and Kaplan, and shortly before I left, we took on another partner named Stephen Ford. Shortly after I left, as you may know, John Kaplan also became a Superior Court judge. We also had an associate named Lawrence Klazak, who left us to become the first full-time public defender in Towson County, and later, of course, also became a Superior Court judge.
Would you say that the mix of work you did during those years as the firm grew and changed, or did you continue to do the same kinds of work?
Pretty much continued to do the same kinds of work. As I say, we maintained a general practice, as was it was common back then, even through '84 when I left to take another position.
Let's talk a little bit about compensation. Do you remember what you were paid when you first started to work for part-time
yes.
in 1960?
Yes, my salary was $25 a week.
Things have certainly changed.
They've certainly changed. Certainly changed, yes.
And I assume it went up from there.
It went up from there, yes.
As far as you know, were you paid comparably to the male attorneys in the firm?
Well, if you figure I worked roughly half a week, that would have been $50 a week. I don't know, as a matter of fact, what the male attorneys were getting. I suspect that it was something more than $50 a week. Although I do know that the salary for the clerk's position, which would have been, as I say, early '61, was $7,500. And that, I remember at the time, that would have been as much or more than most of the men that I knew of were making. So I suspect it was probably about half. The 50 was probably about half what the male attorneys were getting. They were probably getting $100 a week.
And as time went on, do you think the salaries, the pay that you received became comparable to theirs?
That I can't answer that because it was in the late '60s that I became a partner in the firm. So it was, I couldn't, I don't know what other people were making salary-wise. So.
And after that, of course, you would have known.
Yeah. When we hired people as associates, they were all male, so I don't know what we would have paid them had they been a female associate.
But you never had the experience of having to demand more money
No,
in
no.
terms of fair treatment.
No,
Yeah.
no, I was very fairly treated. very fairly treated by Ed Lavitt. And
It seems like you didn't encounter any serious difficulty
not,
in their treatment
no,
of you.
not at all.
What about clients themselves? Did you find in the beginning any resistance to being represented by a woman?
I would say in the very beginning, I don't know if it was resistance as much as they would look to Ed Lavitt for assurance that everything was going well. And after a year or so, they found out that a woman could do just as good a job and knew just as much and was just as professional, etc. So I'd say after the first year, it really wasn't a problem. I think also it helped because, as I say, the office was in Rockville, and my father was the clerk of the courts for the Towland, which was then called Towland County, as opposed to the Towland Judicial District. And as far as dealing with other attorneys, of course, some of them had known me for years because the older ones would have seen me in court as I would go over with my dad. But also, I think it helped having my father there, because if there's anything you don't want to do is truly vex a clerk. And so I think perhaps they were a little more mindful of their treatment of this, not only woman, but a very young woman, because keep in mind I was a year ahead of my normal graduating class, because I was John Yeoman's daughter. Not preference-wise, but just perhaps a little bit more respectful than they might have been, because I saw other women getting treated not so respectfully.
And in terms of the trials that you did have and when you were in court, did that treatment continue?
Yes, which the
respectful
oh yes,
to you.
respectful treatment continued. And as far as the judges were concerned, they expected from not only me but other women just exactly what they expected from the men attorneys, and that was the respect of the court and to be prepared. So.
In the 24 years that you were in the practice, is there anything that you think was the most interesting of all of the kinds of things that you did?
Probably the work for the town, as I said before, because it got into areas that you would not necessarily get into otherwise. And labor issues, and as well as I said, the drafting of the ordinances. I had to go to the town meetings, and actually, it's just as a humorous side of being town attorney, one thing does stand out. My father was the chairman of the Board of Finance, and my brother was moderating a town meeting, and I was town attorney. And someone got up and made a motion. So my brother, knowing that it wasn't right on target with what the item in the town meeting call was, looked over to me and he said, "I'd like an opinion from the town attorney as to whether or not we can vote on this." And I said, "No, it's without the purview of the warning." And my father, keeping in mind he was chairman of the Board of Finance and this had to do with a financial issue, stood up and said, "Well, she's probably right, but let's go vote on it anyway," which they did.
It sounds like typical town business.
Typical town meeting, yes, typical town meeting.
What about your daily routine? What were the hours like?
When I went to
when you were
work
practicing,
full-time,
yes.
I went back full-time. Well, most of the time I accommodated in the morning because I had kids to go off to school. So I got there by 9 o'clock, as opposed to some of my peers who had to do the 7:30 route. And then, so that I established a habit of, if I had to work over, it was at the end of the day. Frequently worked Saturdays, occasionally Sundays.
How long would the day extend for you typically?
6 o'clock, typically.
And then you'd have night meetings from time to time for the town.
Yes,
Yeah.
night meetings for the town. And occasionally, when I first started, the justice courts were still in session, and many of them had their sessions at night. But that was early on. That
The
was
circuit courts, were they, or
no,
what?
this was before the circuit court. They were called the local justice courts. Every town had its own little court, dealt primarily with traffic.
And they would go at night?
That many of them would go at night. But that went by the board in January of '61. So it was actually only that fall, actually before I took the 6 weeks off to have the baby, and then a little bit afterwards that I had to do that at night. But by the time I was working full-time, there was no night courts left. But other than the town meetings, the meetings I had to go to for the town.
During the time you were in practice, in private practice, what would you say your children's contribution or adjustment to the fact that you were working full-time was?
They adjusted beautifully. I think it was because from the time they could remember, dinner might be anywhere from 6 o'clock till 9:30 at night.
So things were not always so predictable.
No, things were not predictable. Things were not predictable.
And did they help out?
Oh, yes,
As
they
they got
helped
a
out.
little older.
Right, right. And I was very fortunate because my mother lived a half mile from me, so that if they had to get taken someplace or carted around during the, like after school, she was always around to do that and to take them to swimming lessons and things like that. But as a matter of fact, it's funny you should ask that because I was just talking to my daughter recently, and I said, you know, how did it feel to grow up to have a mother who was a working mother? And she says, it was fine. I didn't know anything different. And she said, I never felt deprived or
Well, that's
anything.
a nice
yeah, I thought that was a
compliment.
nice compliment.
Yeah,
So.
very nice.
And of course, I can remember one occasion specifically in the 60s. A woman that I met socially asking me, what was I doing working? And didn't I realize I was depriving my husband and my children of myself because I was working?
So what did you say?
Mother. I just said no, because my husband in particular recognized that if I were not working, that I would probably have a nervous breakdown or be a wreck or whatever the terminology was back then within 6 months, because I just enjoyed it so much. And if I could not do it, I probably would have been very unhappy.
What would you say the advantages or the disadvantages, if any, of being a woman in private practice were at that time?
There were certainly no advantages. If you're talking about the early 60s and into the 70s, there were no advantages. The disadvantages are that until you got known, people didn't take you seriously. As I indicated before, not just for myself, but other women that I could see in the profession, there were few women who were trying cases other than family cases. So that was something that was very noticeable. Early on, when I was town attorney, we formed what was called the Connecticut Council of Municipal Attorneys, and Joanne Kulowitz, who of course later became the first judge named by Judge Meskel to the trial bench, she and I were the only women for years involved in the Connecticut Association of Municipal Attorneys. And again, by the time we got to that point, once the men involved realized that we were serious and that we knew what we were doing and were good lawyers, they accepted us. There was no problem after that.
Now, you mentioned that in 1984 you left the practice, and what did you do?
Well, in 1984, I'd been in practice at that point over 24 years, and I received a call from the then Deputy Attorney General. Joe Lieberman had just been elected the year before, and I knew Elliot Gerson because he lived in Andover. I met him actually when I represented the people who sold their house to Elliot and his wife. And he called me up one day and he said, the Attorney General is going to be hiring some new attorneys. Are you interested? I said no. So he said, well, we have a report from a Blue Ribbon Commission. Could I send it to you? So he sent it to me, and I looked it over, and I was very favorably impressed, first with the members that had compiled it, and secondly, with what they were recommending. And then Elliot called me again, and he said, did you read it? And I said, yes. Is the Attorney General going to be implementing any of these suggestions? And he said, oh, yes. And he said, are you interested now Well, ultimately, I decided that I wanted to be part of that and did leave private practice to become an assistant attorney general in September of '84.
And what was it the commission recommended?
It was, bottom line, to make the assistant attorneys general a top-notch law firm, in quotes. And I was just impressed that he wanted to.
What kinds of duties did you have there?
Well, I, interestingly enough, went into what was called the 4D unit, which is the child support unit with the Attorney General's office. And I was there from September of '84 until February of '87. During that period of time, the federal government decided that the states had to get serious about establishing and collecting child support because of the tremendous amount of federal funds that was going to support children on public assistance. So they told the states that they had to do something, and they either had to do it administratively or in a quasi-judicial setting. And what the Connecticut legislature did was to establish the Family Support Magistrate Division of the Superior Court. And that came into being actually in January. It started up in February of '87. There were originally 6 people, 6 family support magistrates that were authorized by the legislation. And I applied to the governor's office, telling the governor that I was interested in becoming a family support magistrate, and was fortunate enough to be chosen as one of the original 6.
Before I get to that, let me ask you about the Attorney General's office. Were there any other women in that 4D section
Yes,
with you?
Joe Lieberman was very interested in attracting women to the position of Assistant Attorney General. And prior to that, there were some women in there, but the vast majority of the Assistant Attorneys General were men. So he encouraged women to come in and named a number of us in the first group that went in, and had continued that until he, of course, left.
And did you remember anyone in particular who was there with you, another woman?
That came in with me
Yes.
At the time. I was the only one who went into the 4D unit, into the child support unit. So I had really no contact with them after that period of time. And I remained, the only woman there for a period of time, for about a year, and then a couple of additional people came in at that time. So,
What would you say the biggest change from private practice to being an Assistant Attorney General was?
the hours. I remember getting home at about 5:30 my first day, and I couldn't imagine being home at 5:30 at night.
And was that a good time in
Yes.
your life to make that
Yes, I think I was ready to
transition?
move on. I was ready to move on at that point.
And how
I
old-
loved private practice, but I enjoyed that aspect of the job of having regular hours.
And how old were your children at that point?
They were all fairly well teenagers at that point. Yeah, they were teenagers.
So you
at that
had a
point.
little more time with them, or
Yes, except, as you know, teenagers have their own thing to do, so.
you're
yeah.
not so interested in spending
Right,
time
so
with
mom. Yeah.
During the time that you were making this transition, had you been involved in any local bar association activities or state bar activities?
Yes, when I went to practice in Rockville, I joined the Tolland County Bar Association. Back then, the officers were elected on seniority. And it was interesting then when it came my turn, I was passed over. The first office was the treasurer, and then you became the vice president and then the president. And I was passed over. And a month or 6 weeks later, I received a call from the man who had been elected the treasurer, and he said, I just found out that you started to practice law in Talon County before I did, and this position should have been yours. And I said, well, yes, I've practiced in Talon County longer than you have. He said, I'm going to resign and insist that you be named. I said, no, I don't want you to do that. I said, wasn't your doing. You didn't know this when you took the position. So he said, I'll see to it that you're named the treasurer next year, which he did.
And who was this?
Saul Kerensky. Saul Kerensky. So I went from then to the vice president and then to the president.
And so you were probably the first woman to be president.
I was the first woman president of the Talon County Bar Association. As a matter of fact, when I started practice, there was only one other woman in the Bar Association, a woman named Elizabeth Dennis Hutchins, who lived in Columbia, who was a member of the Talon County Bar, although she practiced primarily in the Windham County area.
And were there any particular things you did in the local county bar association while you were on the board?
We had a number, we started doing a number of informal educational sessions, and then that became a little more formalized after I left. But it was primarily a group of the local attorneys, I say that not only lived but practiced in Talon County. And we also had a social event or two during the year, which was kind of nice because then you got to meet
some of the people
you didn't see otherwise.
Yeah. How about the state bar, the Connecticut Bar Association?
As I was concluding my year as president of the Talon County Bar, the Connecticut Bar Association position for the Board of Governors for the district that Talon County was in had an opening. So I was asked if I were interested in becoming a member of the Board of Governors of the Connecticut Bar Association. And I immediately said yes, and that was just a wonderful experience. I was the first woman on the Board of Governors of the Connecticut Bar Association.
And what year would that have been in, if you recall?
It was in the early 70s. I don't know exactly the year. It was in the early 70s.
Do you remember anything particular about your first year on the board?
Again, it was interesting because I think the men were not used to having a woman there, but I learned to do a lot of listening and, and gradually participated more and more, so that eventually I was asked if I were interested in becoming a treasurer of the Bar Association, which I did later on, the Connecticut Bar Association. Was also asked if I were interested in moving up in the Bar Association after that, but I declined it with the pressures. I had a small firm, and as you well know, the time demands on the president of the Connecticut Bar Association are tremendous.
They are tremendous, yes. Were there any other women in the House of Delegates or the Board of Governors at that time?
Not at that time. I was on the nominating committee that did nominate the first woman officer. Again, Shirley Racy Beisowitz was nominated as the treasurer initially, and then when she went off is when I became the treasurer.
Oh, I see.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
you sort of exchanged
Yes, we
places.
changed. Yes.
Yeah. And were you on any other Bar Association related
Yes,
committees?
for a number of years I was on a number of the Bar Association committees. The Judiciary Committee, it was called, which did basically the same things that the Judicial Section Commission does now, although it was on an ad hoc basis. The governors generally pretty well did not appoint someone that didn't get through the Judiciary Committee. It was on the Client Security Fund Committee, a number of them over the years.
And was there anyone else, another woman on the Client Security Fund?
Yes, Shirley Beisowitz and I were both on, and another interesting aspect of women and being on committees, the Client Security Fund generally held luncheon meetings, and there was a luncheon meeting held at a club in Meriden. So Shirley and I drove down together, and as we were approaching the building, she said, "Don't be surprised if they don't let us in." I said, "What do you mean, not let us in? We have a meeting here." And she said, "Yes, but this is a man's club. It is women are not allowed. It's a men only. So sure enough, we got in and we said we were here for the Client Security Fund meeting, and they said, well, that's up on the second floor and women cannot go up on to the second floor. So Shirley said, could I speak with the manager, please? So the manager came over and she told him who we were, and he said, I'm sorry, women are not allowed on the second floor and you just cannot go up there. So Shirley wrote out a note to the chair of the committee and gave it to the manager and said, would you please give this to him? And which said basically, we're not allowed in and we're going across the street to have lunch, which we did. About 20 minutes later, the executive director of the Bar Association came in looking very chagrined and very apologetic, and the error had been straightened out and we were invited to then come over. And Shirley, I remember I was ready to pick up and go, and Shirley said, we'll be there after we finish eating. So they had to wait for us. But,
and I think is typically Shirley's attitude.
Oh, she was marvelous.
Not going to be interrupted yet once again and finish what she was doing before.
Yeah, she was marvelous.
Before she continued. But that's a wonderful story. Did you have any other stories concerning those sorts of things, meetings in clubs that were men only?
Yes, the Board of Governors held a meeting in one of the New Haven clubs, which was, again, male only. And while I didn't happen to go to that one, I had another commitment, and Shirley was very concerned about going there. She finally decided she would go, but as a token protest would not eat. And she told the then president what the situation was and suggested that they not meet there again. And he said, well, we're going to meet where I say we meet, at which point the other members of the Board of Governors announced that they were not going to meet there again. And at that point, there had been an official policy of the Bar Association not to meet in places that everyone could not attend. As a matter of fact, I have another humorous story because it involves Justice DuPont. Mm-hmm. She and I were on the Bar Foundation, and it met at the University Club. And I had no trouble getting in because I had been there before and knew the manager. So I just went to see him and said, I'm going to this meeting. And he said, oh, fine. I can remember when Judge DuPont arrived, she said, well, this is very convenient, but coming up the fire escape was a bit hairy.
That's funny. Well, I think it's about time for our break, and when we come back, I'd like to pick up with your appointment as a magistrate that you mentioned earlier in 1987. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, I mentioned before we broke that when we came back, I was going to ask you about your appointment as a support magistrate. Tell me about that process.
Well, as I indicated before, the legislature set up what's called the Family Support Magistrate Division of the Superior Court and provided for the appointment of 6 magistrates. The appointment is strictly by the governor. We do not have to go through the legislature. It's strictly by the governor. They're 3-year terms, and our terms actually started in early January of '87, although the division itself did not start to operate until February of '87.
And what was that appointment process like for you? Was there any committee that interviewed you, or how did it work?
No, it was strictly the appointment by the governor, so that it was necessary for not only to write to indicate that you were interested, but also to have people who knew you well to put in a word to the governor saying she'd do a good job, type thing.
And you were chosen.
And I was chosen, yes.
And do you remember who else was among the first 6 of you?
Yes, there were 5 other men that were named at that time.
Were some of them also from the Attorney General's office, or?
No,
Not.
none of the other 5 was from the Attorney General's office.
And do you know what kinds of backgrounds they had?
Yes, the first Chief Family Support Magistrate was a man named Norman Bazade, and he had previously been a Superior Court judge. And he was the chief. The Chief Family Support Magistrate is named by the Chief Court Administrator.
I see.
And the other people had come, some people had been in private practice, some had worked for corporations and had retired from that and then were doing some private practice, public defending, that type of a thing.
And for people who may not be that familiar with what the system does, tell us what your duties involved in the beginning.
Well, the Family Support Magistrate Division, as I say, was set up by the legislature for the establishment and enforcement of child support and spousal support orders, including 2 years after it was initially set up, given power to do the paternity actions. And these are for what are called 4D cases, which is referenced to a section of the Federal Social Security Act, and includes anyone who is or has been on public assistance, but people can also apply for 4D services. And there has been a big switch shift, I should say, in the number of cases from public assistance to non-public assistance cases. Initially, well over half of the matters that we handle were public assistance related. Now I think that's down to about 17%.
So very little currently.
Yes, yes, and a lot of that has to do with the policy of the state of Connecticut with regard to removing people from public assistance, accompanied by a very successful support system by way of help with daycare, job training, that type of medical insurance, that type of a thing.
When you were first appointed, where were you assigned?
When I was first appointed, I was assigned to Windham County and Talon County.
And you moved from day to day, or?
Yes, moved from day to day. The Family Support magistrates sit in 15 different locations around the state. There are only 3 locations in which there is a magistrate sitting 5 days a week. So,
and what are those 3?
Hartford, New Haven, and Bridgeport.
And that would be because of the volume of
yes,
business?
Yes, the volume of business.
How did you find the transition from being a practicing attorney to being on the bench?
Well, it was a fairly easy adjustment as far as what I was doing, because I was handling these cases in the Attorney General's office. And so the subject matter of the law was just a continuation of what I had been doing for the previous 2.25 years. Being on the other side of the bench, as you know, is quite an experience. I can remember the first day standing before I went out on the bench with my hand on the door thinking, good grief, what did I get myself into? And then went out, and it was just as if I had been doing it for years, because I had spent so much time in the courtroom. So.
It's sort of like riding a bicycle, or perhaps
yes,
riding a horse.
Riding
in
a
your
horse,
case.
you don't forget, yes,
Yeah.
yes.
It's
yes.
always part of you.
Yeah. And as I said, I'd spent so much time in the courtroom prior to that it was an easy adjustment.
In those first few years as a magistrate, is there anything that you did that sticks out in your mind particularly as a highlight?
I think as far as the highlight of it is, in broadly speaking, the satisfaction from finally having a venue in which not only could the custodial parents get child support orders in place, but have those enforced. And the satisfaction from seeing people finally being, and there's no other word for it, forced to be responsible for their children, financially at least, there's not much we can do about everything else, which of course is very important, but we can with regard to the financial aspect of it. And
Well,
that was a big shift.
I do know that the magistrate system has made a tremendous difference in the collection of support amounts due for children.
Yes, it's steadily gone up over the years. And the whole program itself is very cost effective. The last figures I saw were that for every dollar spent, about $3.70 was collected. So it's very economically sound.
Now, during
program.
the time that you were first a magistrate, did you continue to be active in bar functions?
Yes, but on a much more limited basis. I was for a number of years on the bar examining committee. As a matter of fact, I believe that's where I met you.
Yes, that is where we first met. I think I was appointed to that committee in 1986, and I think you were already on the committee when I was appointed.
And that was a great experience. What I enjoyed about it most was I was on the subcommittee that chose the essay questions for the exams, and so we would read literally dozens of those and make selections, and I found it extremely interesting.
I think that part of how the exams should be designed and what essay questions we ask continues to be. I do that with 2 other attorneys now. Myself, actually.
So the process has continued much the same.
It has, yes. And I know that there came a time when you left the committee because of the press of other business. And when was that?
Yes, actually it was in 1995 when I became the Chief Family Support Magistrate. In February of 94, I became the acting chief when the then chief became ill. And I was the acting chief from February of 94 until August of 95 when the chief magistrate retired. And I became the Chief Family Support Magistrate. And at that point, between the court and the administrative end of the job, I found it necessary to resign from the bar examining committee.
So we have another first, do we? You're the first woman to be
Yes.
appointed as the chief.
Yes,
Support
I was the first
magistrate.
woman family support magistrate, and then the
And the-
first woman to be the chief, yes.
And how do you find that in terms of the extra duties that you have?
The administrative end of it?
Yeah.
Well, it's a whole new aspect of what I had been doing, at least as far as the practice of law was concerned. I wasn't that involved in the administrative end of the office, which was a fairly small office. Our senior partner pretty much took care of that. But I did have the year and a half in training, so to speak, because while the then chief magistrate was ill, he was back on a limited basis. So it was a good year in which I could rely on his advice and his direction and his help in how to handle the administrative end of it. So by the time I became chief, I was very comfortable in the job.
And you still sit actively, I know,
Yes, I
as
do.
a support magistrate. Do you get some time dispensation to deal with the administrative end of it?
Yes, I sit in court on a regular assignment on a limited basis. The other days of the week are for administrative matters. However, if someone is out and there is no one else to fill in, then I have to be in court, which is, for example, now with vacations, I'm in court most of the time. It is very helpful in that about the time I became chief, one of the original magistrates, a man named Alan Steele, retired and became a family support referee. And he still does sit on an as-needed basis. But he's also enjoying his retirement. So when he isn't able to fill in, or if more than one magistrate is out. So there are times such as now that I'm in court 5 days a week.
And I know the number of magistrates has increased. How many people do you have serving now?
There are 9 magistrates now.
So 8 in addition to yourself?
8 in addition to the chief, and then, as I say, referee Steele can sit and he has all of the powers that a a family support magistrate does. So it's very helpful having him to be able to fill in.
So you have a 9.5, so to speak.
9.5, yes.
If one can say he's a half person.
Yeah.
And he certainly seems to enjoy his work. I see him occasionally both in Middletown and when I was previously in New Britain.
Yes, yes, he
filling
does.
in, and,
Particularly in Middletown, is that he lives in Middletown,
Yes,
so
so
I don't have
it's-
too much trouble getting him to sit in Middletown
Yeah.
Thursdays and Fridays.
What would you say in your time as chief magistrate has been one of the more challenging issues that you've had to face?
Meeting the demands of an ever-increasing caseload without additional magistrates, and on numerous occasions the support staff that feeds the cases into the court. As I say, we started out with 6. 1991 was the last time that the number of magistrates were increased. It was originally increased from 6 to 7, and then from 7 to 9 in 1991. So since 91, we've been dealing with 9 magistrates for an ever-increasing caseload.
In an ideal world, what do you think would be an appropriate number for the caseload you presently have?
Another 3.
So you think
Yeah.
you could use 12?
Yes, another 3. There are times, for example, last year when there were not only the layoffs but the retirements of a number of state employees. We saw the caseload drop simply because there were fewer assistant attorneys general, there were fewer Department of Social Services people, there were fewer support enforcement people. That's starting to come back now as positions are being filled.
So there's more volume into the court.
So there's more volume coming
Maybe
back
it's
into the courts now.
benefit.
The time spent on cases has also changed in that we see a lot more pro se's, that is, people representing themselves. And of course, that's more time consuming than if you have 2 lawyers who are there with all papers in order presenting the case. But well over half, for example, of our motions to modify the child support orders now are done by people pro se, which was almost unheard of 5 or 6 years ago.
Yes, and I know, like the Superior Court on the family side, you have more and more sort of standardized forms that people are able to use, and assistance in
Yes.
the public libraries, in the
Yes.
court libraries, to
Yes.
help them in that task, since they do choose often to proceed by themselves.
Yes, especially at the level where people simply cannot afford an attorney, and if they don't do it themselves, it's not going to get done. So that inappropriate orders are left in place, or orders perhaps that should be terminated because the custody has changed or something along those lines. So I think it's a big value, tremendous value to the general public that the courts have opened up so that people can represent themselves.
I would agree with you. I think it is, however, also not an easy thing for a magistrate or a judge to handle a pro se who doesn't always understand the system and who doesn't always behave in an appropriate way. I think it presents special challenges.
Yes, it does, and you have to be extremely patient and do the best you can, because of course you can't give legal advice off, as you know. So you simply have to try to direct them to somebody who can help them. And much of the support staff, from the clerks to the assistant attorneys general to the support enforcement people who are there, can also often be very helpful. Keeping in mind, though, that there's a limit to that too, because very often they're, quote, on the other side, unquote. But it works quite well. It's just somewhat cumbersome sometimes because you have to go that much slower to make sure people understand, because that's extremely important, that they understand what they're doing and the consequences of
important issues at stake that they can have a large impact on their lives. Let me ask you a number of questions, sort of looking back on the time you have had as an attorney and as a magistrate. If you had a chance to live your life over again, would you become an attorney?
Oh, there's no question.
You would, yes.
Yeah, no question. As I said, when I was a child, I didn't want to be anything but, and I don't want to be anything but, and that 44 years hasn't changed.
I know sometimes you hear attorneys talk about how the practice has changed and how they wouldn't make that choice today, but you haven't had that experience.
No, I haven't had that experience. There's no question the practice has changed. In some ways, I think it's for the better.
And how would you say it's changed for the better?
Being able to have the luxury of specializing. As I mentioned earlier, ours was a small firm, a general practitioner. And that was pretty much the case of most of the law offices in our area. That is the Rockville, Manchester, Windham, Willimantic areas. It was not unusual to have, for example, a lawyer defending a murderer in a murder trial one day and be sitting across the table from him at a real estate closing the next. I think specialization allows you to become a real expert in the field that you've chosen, or the fields that you've chosen, and then be able to give your clients the best possible representation and advice that they can get.
Are there any other things that you think have improved?
As far as the practice of
Yes.
law, the technology, of course, has made
Yes.
the practice a lot more efficient. Just the research materials that now can be done electronically as opposed to the library with the old research methods.
I think
and
also
the communication methods that we now have.
the access to the research materials that a small firm can have, as well as the larger firms who in the past were able to afford to buy all those books,
Yes.
really changes the dynamics of what's available. How about as the work of a magistrate? Do you think the technology has made an impact there?
Yes, the information that whether it's the Assistant Attorney General or the support enforcement officers present to us is up to date. When we first started out, the figures that they were giving us were probably several weeks old. Now they're very up to date. Such things as being able to get military affidavits, they can access that information online. They not have to wait the 3 months that it used to take to get a military affidavit if you had to write to the services and things like that.
Yes.
And of course, there's the whole what I'll term word processing that allows for decisions to be done very quickly and not only from the research angle, but the reviewing and changes being made, et cetera. Instead of being retyped, it can be just done
And I
on a computer. And
assume you need less staff as a result for the clerical aspects of decision writing.
well, initially we didn't have a secretary. It was only within the last 10 years that we actually had a secretary. I was very fortunate because I used the judge's secretary in Willimantic, at least ever since I've become chief. But yes, and most of us, because we for years didn't have a research clerk, certainly the technology on the research has been extremely helpful.
If you were to give advice to a young woman entering the legal profession today, what would you tell that person?
I would tell them, I would encourage them to do that. I think it's a great profession. They've got to expect to work very hard. And if it were a woman, I think I would give her the same advice that I received: never forget you're a lady.
There's a lot to be said for that, since we're not men.
Yes.
Do you think that the presence of increasing number of women attorneys has made a change in the profession at all?
Yes, I think it's opened up the great pool of talent that was always there, that was never utilized prior to women becoming attorneys and becoming attorneys in prominent positions, as many of them are now, particularly judges. You have to stop and think it was the early 70s before there was a woman named to the trial bench.
Yes.
So
yes.
that's not that long ago.
It isn't very long.
No.
No. And I know that in some other states it's been a little longer, but it's still a relatively recent phenomenon.
Yes. And as a matter of fact, you would probably know better than I how many women judges there are now as compared with the number of men judges. So.
I think there are 48 or 49. We've had some recent appointees, and I don't know that I've actually counted them, but it's increasing. In fact, you have a good number of magistrates who are
Yes.
women.
Yes.
And how does the mix, how is the mix now? Do you know?
I think it's 5 and 4.
So
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
fairly
It's very-
balanced.
Yeah, fairly balanced, yeah.
And as we draw the interview to a close, is there anything you'd like to share about your life experience as a woman attorney that I haven't really asked you about?
No, other than, as I indicated a minute ago, I can't imagine doing anything else but.
That's a good way to feel about your life.
Yeah.
And with that, we'll end our interview. Thank
Okay,
you very much.
Thank you very much.